Welcome to episode 10 of the Argue With Me podcast. My guest this time around is Chris Freiman, a philosopher. Chris is an interesting fellow for a number of reasons. One, he's very funny. I appreciate his sense of humor. It's usually filled with sarcasm and Simpsons references and Seinfeld isms and that sort of thing. So, right up my alley anyway. But also, Chris is a really bright guy who is a utilitarian and a libertarian. And that's what I wanted to talk to him about, at least for this discussion, because in my experience anyway, and your mileage may vary, it's rare to run into a libertarian who is explicitly a utilitarian. I do know some libertarians who give utilitarian style thinking, the time of day. They engage in it sometimes when they think it's appropriate, but normally if I say, are you a strict utilitarian? Are you, not in a technical sense, but just are you a utilitarian? Is that where you derive what we ought to do? They will balk and they'll say, no, I'm not a utilitarian. I just have regard for the non-aggression principle, or I'm a natural law guy, or I'm religious. I get that one quite a bit. Or even I'm an intuitionist. I'll get that sort of thing. Rarely does somebody just bite the bullet and say, no, you know what, I'm a utilitarian. So I wanted to talk to Chris about that. Now, my apologies to him and to you, dear listener or viewer. The video did not come out well on this interview. We had a hard time for some reason. It wasn't that his webcam wasn't working or that mine wasn't working, but the video just was choppy no matter what we did. We tried coming in and out of the meeting several times and that type of thing. We just couldn't fix it, but the audio came out perfectly. So I hope you enjoy the conversation nonetheless. All right, welcome to the Argue With Me podcast. Today I have with me Chris Freiman, a professor at the University of West Virginia. Is it West Virginia University or
West
University
Virginia University, yeah.
Yeah, I knew I was going to get
That's
that
all
backwards.
right. That's okay.
Do that all the time. We're having a bit of trouble with Chris's video feed at the moment, so this might turn into an audio-only podcast. But regardless, I appreciate your presence here, and I'm sure this will be a good conversation. So thank you.
Well, what is the phrase? You have a face made for radio. Maybe I have a face made for audio only. Might be for the best. Might be for the best.
I don't think you're in any trouble. Look, I think I'm in more trouble than you are in that front. Well, so no problem.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so I really wanted to get you on here. You and I have not much background, but a little background on Facebook. I mean, I follow some of your academic work, which I came to know you from Facebook. I also attended one of your colloquiums, markets. I think it was moral limits of markets, something like that, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, thank you. That sounds right.
Yeah, it was a 3 years ago or so, 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, it was fantastic. So this is really great having you here. And when I sent you a message saying, would you be on? I told you what I wanted to discuss was your utilitarianism. And I'll just really quickly say why I want to discuss that. Not that you're not interesting in other ways too, that I'm sure will come up. But look, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people who consider themselves either libertarians or classic liberals or market economics, free market types, whatever label they want to put on themselves, anarcho-capitalists, whatever. And often I will say, like, so why are you in favor of markets? And they'll say something like, well, the outcome is really good. Like, I just like to live in a place with markets. And I go, okay, so you're like a consequentialist? And they'll go, oh, no. No, I'm not a consequentialist. And then it's like fill in the blank. It's like I believe in Jesus, or I am an intuitionist, or it's always something, but it's never I'm a consequentialist utilitarian, except you're the guy I know. So what I want to know is, first of all, I guess maybe it makes most sense to explain your beliefs around markets and however you want to term it, libertarianism, whatever, and then how you came to them, and explain
how you ended up as a utilitarian and that sort of thing. Is that okay for a prompt?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. And okay. No, I agree. I'll have these same sorts of conversations where people will say, "Oh, I love I love markets. I love capitalism. This is all private property. Is all great." So the consequences are really what sort of motivates the endorsement of these sorts of things. But then they do sort of shy away from the label of consequentialist. But I don't shy away from the label. I think that's basically right. I think if you are asking for the reasons why you should endorse libertarianism, something like libertarianism, so free markets, civil liberties, private property, et cetera, et cetera. What is the reason to support that kind of institutional arrangement? I would say that it has good consequences. It makes us happier. It makes us more prosperous. It makes us more peaceful. These sorts of things. These are things that we want. And so I think the difference between me and the person who says, "Well, I like the outcomes produced by markets and libertarian style institutions, but I don't want to call myself a consequentialist," is I think the consequences are the reason to endorse those things. Whereas I think other libertarians, other classical liberals will say that's one reason, but there are these other reasons, like you said, respect for natural rights, could talk about alternatives. But my view is, institutions are sort of like tools. They're, things that we value because they produce outcomes that we want. So you don't value plumbing for its own sake. You value plumbing because it gets you something that you want. I don't value private property, the free market, et cetera, for their own sake. I value them because they produce these outcomes that we want, because the consequences are good. Now, as to why so I think there are two sort of separate issues here. So one is, why be a consequentialist? And then there's a sort of follow-up question, which is, well, if you're a consequentialist, why be a libertarian? So what exactly is the fit between libertarianism and consequentialism? To answer the first question, I think there's sort of two ways of going about it, two ways of seeing the appeal of something like consequentialism, where you say, look, what ultimately matters morally are the consequences of an action or an institution, that sort of thing. So one, I think it does a very nice job of making sense of the way we think about ordinary morality. So you say, we have all of these kind of intuitive moral rules, don't hurt people, don't steal, help people when you can, these sorts of things. And you say, okay, these all seem like pretty good moral principles to me. What would justify them? Like, why should I keep my promises? Why shouldn't I hurt people? Why should I help people when I can? And I think a very plausible answer to those questions is, well, doing so has good consequences. Like hurting people has bad consequences. Breaking promises has bad consequences. And so, of course, that doesn't get you all the way to consequentialism, but maybe that gets the consequentialist a foot in the door. Say, okay, I can kind of see how this might justify things that we want to justify about common sense morality. And the other thing that's appealing to me about consequentialism is it makes sense of the idea that moral rules have to have exceptions. So there's this very famous case from philosophy. Say, okay, lying is wrong. I'm with you. Okay, lying is wrong. Like, okay, well, what if an innocent person knocks on your door and says, can I hide in your house? An axe murderer is coming after me. And you go, yeah, sure. Go into my house and hide. And the axe murderer shows up and says, hey, is that person in your house? And the only way to get this axe murderer off your doorstep is to lie. You can't go silent. You can't sort of, get this person away from you by any other means. You just have to lie and say, no, this person is not in my house. It seems to me pretty clear you have to lie. You have to say this person is not in my house. And consequentialism does a very nice job of accommodating this belief. So you say, generally speaking, tell the truth. Telling the truth helps us live together, build trust, have reliable expectations about how other people behave, these sorts of things. But there are exceptional circumstances. So when lying produces good consequences, lie. When it produces bad consequences, don't lie. So there again, I think is part of the appeal of consequentialism. And then just sort of more generally, I think it makes a lot of sense just to think morality is something that's got to be good for us. not necessarily as individuals, but it's the sort of thing that, morality has got to make society better. It's got to make life better in some way. So it's not exactly valuable in itself, but like the point of living in a moral society, a society that cares about these things, is that it makes the people in that society better. So again, in some senses, like it's got to have good consequences. And now you have a particular version of consequentialism, which is probably the most famous, utilitarianism. And so it's not just about producing good consequences. Morality is not just about good consequences. It's about the best consequences. So you have to maximize the good. You say, well, what's the good? Utilitarians will give you different sorts of answers, but typically they're things like well-being, happiness. Those are sort of the most common answers. But that to me, it seems very intuitive. So it seems to me like it's better to have more happiness than less happiness. Like if somebody came up to you and they said, look, I can snap my fingers and I can make you twice as happy as you are, or 3 times as happy as you are. And like nothing else will change. This is not like, some crazy twist or anything like that. You just say, I can double your happiness for extra. Why wouldn't you go for the triple? It'd be crazy not to go for the triple. And so it just seems very intuitive that we don't just want the good consequence, we want the best that we can get. And so you put these ideas together, it's like morality's kind of got to make us better off, society better off in some way. And why would you ever choose to be less well off than you could be? Like, why would you want less value rather than more value? That doesn't really make sense to me. And so you put all these ideas together and you can kind of see the intuitive appeal of being a consequentialist, or maybe more specifically a utilitarian. Like morality is good for us. It's better to be better off than less well off, is sort of the basic intuitive case for it. Mm-hmm. And I could talk a little bit more about why I think this aligns with libertarianism. I mean, one, just so I think there are sort of interesting debates about the level of regulation and redistribution we want within capitalism. I think that's an interesting debate. I think that's a live debate. I think the debate between something like socialists and capitalists, where they're talking about state ownership of the means of production or some other form of collective ownership, I don't think that's really a live debate anymore. I guess it's 2024 now that we're talking. But in 2024, I think that debate's over. Like, we know that if you want sort of a prosperous economy, happiness, these sorts of things, socialism is just not the way to get that. And so I think there's already this kind of consequentialist presumption in favor of capitalism, because we know that capitalism tends to have good consequences. And then we can get into more of the detailed debates about, well, does like regulating capitalism tend to do well or do poorly? Do we want a lot of redistribution? That sort of stuff. And one thought there is just, I think we have reason to be skeptical about a lot of government intervention into the market when we take the lessons of public choice economics very seriously. So if we say, look, you're the same person when you're shopping for bread that you are when you're shopping for a senator, you're no more virtuous in politics than you are in the market, then a lot of the arguments for redistribution regulation just end up kind of falling flat, because you say, oh, in an ideal world, if we had angels for politicians and voters, they could really help improve market outcomes. I say, okay, I could buy that. But what about the real world? And then when we say, well, in the real world, voters and politicians, bureaucrats, they have all these incentive problems, then I think the case for something closer to very lightly regulated capitalism becomes a lot stronger.
Yeah, so I think you're, I want to go back to a bunch of the stuff that you said. I've made some notes, but I want to pick up right actually where you're leaving off here, because in particular, I think you're pointing towards why, when I ask libertarians if they're utilitarian or consequentialist, they say no. And I think it's because a lot of them are worried that there might be an alternative arrangement in society that also could be very good for human beings that we've not really discovered. And they're not really open to that. And it's a lot easier to just say, no, you're very evil if you don't think the way that I think. Do you think that sort of bias plays into the responses I normally get?
Well, so I mean, here's what I have to say about. So here's where I might part ways with a lot of other libertarians.
Sure, start.
If somehow, and so I'll preface this by saying I don't actually believe this is likely to be the case, but like you see these arguments floating around, like, well, like maybe in 5 years with really advanced artificial intelligence, we could kind of make socialism work. I don't buy that argument. But suppose I did. Suppose it were true. Suppose we got, benevolence. This is like the start of a dystopian science fiction. I know.
Yeah,
But
I
so
know.
suppose it really worked out. Somehow we've solved all the problems and we've got socialism and it's amazing and people are ecstatic and we're living great lives. We're happy, healthy, rich, etc. And socialism has delivered the goods. I'd be like, all right, let's go with socialism in that case. And I think a lot of libertarians would press back and they say, look, it's not about that. It's about freedom for its own sake, that sort of thing. And I get why people say that. I understand where they're coming from, but it's a different perspective for me. It's no, if socialism can deliver the goods, let's do it. The problem is it doesn't do it, and so that's the best reason for me to be. So, like I said, it really is like, if somebody says, here are two medicines, I want the medicine that works the best, like, has the best outcomes, accounted for the cost and so on. And like, that's kind of how I think about economic arrangements. Like, it's, just give me what works the best. And as far as we know, well, I'll say lightly regulated capitalism with maybe some light, like a dusting of redistribution.
So I'm gonna throw an extra layer of annoyance onto this.
Yeah, no, I love
other
it. Let's do it.
right? So I agree with pretty much everything you're saying right now, except I have again, this is just my personal view of this, is that I don't actually understand why morals or the concept of morals or anything related to morals is really important in a discussion about libertarianism. And in fact, I think it might even be a category error because, like, to me, okay, what do I want? I want a free society where I can pursue my interests and I'm not starving and my family's doing okay, my neighbor's all right, and that sort of thing. I think most people would just agree with that, like right away. Like, yeah, I would like all those things too. Now, there's some percentage of humanity that is mentally ill, and we all know that, and they want nothing but destruction. But the vast majority of us don't want that. And so if the answer is that markets will provide that best, well, then yeah, that's what we should do.
Yeah.
Now, then somebody will complain, like maybe it's a Rawlsian or somebody like Cohen, who will even admit that, begrudgingly, markets, yeah, I guess they do this and that thing. And some inequality is, I guess we need to have that, but it's still immoral. And I'm going, well, I don't care. What do you even mean anymore by immoral? Like, if this is just what you like, can't you just admit that your preference is that we don't have private property or something like that? Like, why can't you just admit that? And now to cap off the annoyance, like, I have to tell you, if, like you said, there was some machine, and again, I don't think this will exist either, just for the sheer number of variables, but it was going to arrange our affairs better than we could, and we'd all be happier, I would want that too. I mean, that I don't see a reason why I wouldn't want that. So what do you think? Are morals,
Yeah,
is it even necessary to discuss morals in this? Like, where does it even come up?
Well, so I do. So I like where you were headed at the end, because it seems like you were agreeing with me, which is a rare
do
thing.
somewhat agree
and I
with
like
you.
Yeah. But right. So in terms of, Rawls and Cohen, so I mean, Rawls is going to say, look, like there's still this issue of fairness. So you might say, like, yeah, everybody wants, to be happy and healthy, their family be taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. But there are a lot of different ways that can go. So like, what is the appropriate distribution of resources between you and your neighbor? And then once we're talking about, or the fair distribution is maybe the question to ask, what's the fair distribution? He's going to say, then you have to talk, then we're in the territory of morality or justice. Cohen has this sort of interesting analogy. So as you know, he's a very strong egalitarian. He thinks only, very few inequalities are justified, like they have to meet certain sorts of conditions. And so he says, look, we might nevertheless tolerate like injustices by his lights in the real world, because those injustices produce good outcomes. So if you have, I don't know, the brain surgeon who has all of this natural talent, she didn't earn it. She was like born with whatever, I don't know how it works, but like developed hand-eye coordination because, you know, she's got great vision, whatever. Didn't earn it, just has these natural talents. Maybe, you know, her parents put her through med school, this sort of stuff. And Cohen says, you know, it's not really fair for you to get more money than other people simply in virtue of having these gifts. Like you're not working harder than, you know, a person who drives a taxi, but you just have, you know, natural gifts that, and, you know, or socioeconomic gifts that the taxi driver. So it's not really fair. You shouldn't ask for more. And, you know, Cohen imagines the surgeon saying something like, I don't know, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. But the fact of the matter is, if you want me to keep performing these surgeries, you're going to have to pay me more than the taxi driver. Now, Cohen says, maybe you pay her. In the same way that if somebody kidnaps her kids and they say, I will return the kids for $10,000, you might pay them the $10,000. Why? To get them to do what you want. But the fact remains that the demand made in both cases is in some sense unjust, according to Cohen. So in the case of the talented surgeon, it is in some sense unjust for her to say, pay me more than the taxi driver, even though I'm not working any harder. And so here again, you know, it's unjust for the person who kidnaps, for a person to kidnap your kids and demands money to get them, to give them back, but you might pay them. And so it's like that's, you know, there's this debate we can have about if it's really unjust for her to ask for that. But then once we're in that debate, then we are talking about morality. We are talking about injustice.
Right. So let me, okay, if we're talking about it in those terms, then yeah, we're going to get into a world of morality. But I guess my sort of thinking on this is like, okay, who cares? Because what we're going to do is we live in this thing called the real world. And you can set up things however you want, Cohen, and I'll set up things like whoever, Brian Kaplan would. Okay. And let's see in 20 years how things go. This is ultimately going to decide what's possible anyway. So whether you think it's whether in your world this is unjust or not unjust is irrelevant. You're basically arguing about something that doesn't exist because it's not, you know, you might as well say, well, it's not just that I don't know, I can't fly, right? Like it's a category error at that point. It's just not something that's possible. So so is it even worth getting into that type of thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I think somebody like Cohen would distinguish between the case of, you know, wouldn't it be nice if I could flap my arms and fly, versus like it's possible for the surgeon to say, you know, I'll work for as much as the taxi driver and no more. It's more just like she really doesn't want to.
You know what's
And
interesting about that? I'm sorry, I hope you
yeah,
don't mind me interrupting.
no,
but
go for it, please do.
It's like, okay, the Rawls and Cohen will both make that argument about, hey, this person didn't deserve it. They just were born with that talent, and so we're making a deterministic claim here. Um, and this is the moral I'm deriving from it somehow, out of this physical deterministic claim. But then at the same time, it seems wrong to turn around and say that things could be otherwise. So like okay, now I'm saying the universe is deterministic. I'm deterministic about this type of thing, and I'm not deterministic about people that live in the universe. This seems like a problem.
Well, yeah, so it could be the case that we say, well, we're not going to blame that, like, you know, if we're doing this thing where you say, well, in some sense, this was all set in motion by the Big Bang, and yeah, who has control of the Big Bang? Nobody.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't blame. I mean, if we're really like, so I think like Cohen and Rawls' view about free will is fairly complicated, but I think that, you know, somebody who's sort of in their ideological ballpark might say, look, I might not blame the surgeon in some deep sense, and that, like, you know, because now praise and blame, it's going to be complicated what we can praise. But I don't have, a Rawlsian, Speaking for the Rawlsian, putting on my Rawlsian hat, maybe I'm not going to blame the surgeon. So Rawls talks about how even if you work hard and you have good character, ultimately that's not up to you, because maybe you have certain sorts of personality traits that you got from your parent, like who knows, but you didn't earn them. And so you don't deserve, in some sense, the income you can generate with those traits. And so also maybe we don't praise people for the work that they do with those traits. Okay, so I guess that's a long-winded way of saying they might not be too troubled by the implication that we can't blame the surgeon for asking for more. So we might say, look, we don't really blame you, and heck, we'll even toss in the money. Maybe it's almost like morally analogous to a bribe. We'll bribe you to do what we want you to do. But the demand that you are making is unjust. You should not be making this. And then there are complications like should not, like, but yeah.
Yeah, we're getting back into like the category, because it's like, we're not going to blame you. So we're already out of the realm of morals. It's just like, what will happen if X happens, will Y follow, is a science experiment, right? And so I just, this is, by the way, not a problem with your viewpoint, I necessarily. I think it's more so a problem for these sorts of Rawlsian arguments that that come up. And this is why I think I end up being sympathetic with your viewpoint, actually, which is just that, well, we can figure out what works and what doesn't work, and why don't we just go with what works? Why do we have to have this sort of argument, you know?
And even non-consequentialist libertarians, so Nozick has a really nice discussion of this sort of issue, where for one, he registers a kind of skepticism about this kind of like rejection of desert. And he says, look, it's like, in some sense, it might be like true. So he has this famous Will Chamberlain example, but so he's like, and I actually don't know if this is, I don't think this is in the context of the Will Chamberlain example, but talking about Nozick makes me think about Will Chamberlain. But you could hear it. Now I'm putting on my Nozick hat. So look, Will Chamberlain was like 7'1", 7'2", something like that. He didn't earn it. He didn't earn that height. But that doesn't mean that it is impossible for him to ever earn anything that's kind of entangled with his height. So in other words, yeah, he didn't earn his height, but height plus the work he put in and the points that he scored might add up to the claim that he like deserves his income, or he deserves the MVP or something like that. And somebody's like, yeah, but he didn't earn his height. Okay, but nevertheless, he could earn income that was made possible in part by his height. But the real reason I brought up Nozick is that his actual view is, look, you don't really have to get into the realm of desert at all when we're talking about economic justice. I didn't earn my kidneys, like healthy kidneys. That was luck. But nevertheless, so this is again like Nozick's case, it would be wrong for the state to take one of my kidneys without my consent and redistribute it. And even Rawls would agree with this. And so Nozick's point is like, let's talk less about desert and more about what he calls entitlement. So I'm entitled to my kidneys, even though I didn't earn them. And that entitlement sort of insulates me from having them redistributed by the state. And the same thing could be true of wealth and income on his view.
Right. Yeah. And all of that's, I mean, Nozick, I'm sure we're both big fans of Nozick, and all of that is available to Nozick to say, and it makes sense from his point of view, even if I might balk at a couple little details here and there. So that makes sense to me. So then what would you say about I'm entitled to my kidney thing in the case of the famous thought experiment against utilitarianism about, I'm going to separate this guy's liver into 5 pieces and give his heart to someone else, and 10 other people are going to live. I know that math didn't add up, but you get where I'm going with this.
Right. No, I get it. Yeah, no, that's good. So, I mean, one thing that I'll say initially is, so you could differentiate between sort of act utilitarians or act consequentialists, rule utilitarians, rule, and then institutional. And so one move you could make is to say, I am a utilitarian or a consequentialist about institutions, not so much acts. And there are theorists and philosophers who make this move. So they say, there's one standard for what you as an individual should live by. And that's not utilitarianism. That could be something else. And then there's the standard that we want to use to judge institutions. And that's utilitarianism or some version of consequentialism. And so if you take that line, I think it becomes a less difficult problem. So the question is sort of like, well, given human beings as they are, with the information that they have and the incentives that they have, do you trust the state to administer a kidney redistribution program in a way that actually produces good results?
Right.
And I'm pretty skeptical of that. And so, and you can even imagine it on the smaller scale. So like a hospital that institutionalized this policy, they kind of have two options. They make it public, and then you're like, well, I'm not. They're like, oh, come to the hospital, get your stitches removed. I'm not going into that hospital if I know it has the kidney redistribution policy.
Yeah.
And so then I'm not going into the hospital like I need stitches, and now I'm not getting my stitches treated because I'm scared that my kidney is going to be confiscated when I go into this hospital. That's one option. And so David Schmitz, who's a colleague of mine actually here at WVU, he talks about this, where it's like you need stable expectations. So he's like, you don't want to have a hospital that has this policy because you want people to feel safe going into the hospital. So I think that's absolutely right. Now like the second move in this argument is like, yeah, just make it secret.
Yeah.
So like you run the hospital and you somehow you're able to pull this off. We're like, no, but then it's like, wait a second. So now we're empowering fallible human beings to like confiscate body parts without any public oversight. It's like, that doesn't sound too good to me either. So here again, it's like, yeah, we've got angels running this system. That's a different story. Maybe I sign up for that with angels.
No,
Human
yeah, well,
beings, maybe
there
not.
you go. Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, look, this is another version of that famous objection about the sheriff, right? Where you have a bunch of angry people over whatever. The story changes a little each time. A killing, the sheriff knows he can pin it on somebody, and that nobody will ever find out, and that will appease the mob, which will prevent a riot. And the utilitarian argument is, yeah, he should totally blame that blameless person or the unblameworthy person, and prevent the massive riot that would damage all this other stuff afterwards, because it's just the best option, right? But then we know that a utilitarian will potentially have responses to that, and then there's responses that come back, and eventually sometimes utilitarians will just bite the bullet and go, yeah, the hospital should be taking those organs and should be lying credibly, and
Yeah,
like
no,
in the margin where it is perfect, that's totally what they should be doing. What are your thoughts on those sorts of
yeah, no, I
basically?
think that's like the right way to push back on the utilitarian. So my response is, it is true that there are bad bullets that utilitarians will have to bite. However, it's worth bearing in mind that every alternative to utilitarianism has its own bullets to bite. And so, so I guess one way of putting my position here is that it's what Churchill's like, democracy is the worst form of government except all the others.
Right.
So utilitarianism is the worst moral theory except all the others. So, I could have a conversation with a Nozikian, for example, where they're just super anti-consequentialist, very kind of deontological account of what rights people have. And I say, well, like, suppose it's somehow the case that by stealing some money from you, and I can never repay you, I'm able to like purchase a device that saves all life on Earth.
Right.
And if you're really being a strict Nozikian, you say, I can't do it. That to me is a much worse bullet to bite. To say that I can't steal $5 to save the world. Now, Nozick actually has this little bit that very few people talk about, but I think it's kind of revealing, where he's like, well, maybe we can violate rights to avoid quote unquote catastrophic moral horror. And like, okay, first, like what qualifies as that? Like, I think that's an interesting question.
There's
But
that
also
line.
the worry about that move, and you see people making this kind of move all the time, is like, that just seems really ad hoc to me. They're like, we're going to be anti-consequentialist right up to the point where the going gets tough. And then when the going gets tough, we flip a switch and all of a sudden consequences come in and kind of overwhelm rights. I say, like, okay. And you could flesh out that theory in different ways, but that always it sits poorly with me because it really just it does seem like this is a really uncomfortable implication of my view. And so I'm going to have this ad hoc introduction of something like consequentialism to save the day. I never liked that. I didn't think that was
Well, it's funny you said so. Look, we all have our biases, and we all start off as kids and grow up, and you latch onto something first somewhere. And I have to say, ideally, I wish just somehow in my bones, deontology, it just seems right to me. Oh, look at how dutiful I am. Like it's really tough to be dutiful, and I am doing it, and that type of thing. But like you said, the contradictions become overwhelming for me after a while. And I've had enough conversations with libertarians about the non-aggression principle where they're like, no, I wouldn't scratch somebody's thumb to prevent an asteroid from killing everybody. And I start going, but really though, like you really wouldn't?
Yeah. So I think the best move for the non-consequentialist to make in response to that is to say, well, okay, then I'm going to abandon really strict deontology, and I'll adopt a kind of pluralism where rights matter, consequences matter, and they all kind of fit together in this perfect way that never yields any uncomfortable implications. Like, well, okay, so I think actually a lot of people are like that. It's like a bunch of stuff. It's a bunch of moral principles. They don't reduce to any one thing, but they all kind of fit together. I am open to that view, but my follow-up question, and like I've never quite gotten a satisfactory answer, or an answer that satisfies me, I guess, is you have to specify exactly how they fit together.
Yeah.
So it's not enough for me if somebody says, well, rights matter and consequences matter. And I say, well, what does that mean? Is it like, 50 units of well-being can outweigh one small rights violation? And then what counts as a small rights violation? So like, I could imagine somebody, having it all up on the chalkboard. And I say, yeah, you know what? That works out really well. And then I will say, okay, I'm on board now with your brand of pluralism. So I don't want to close that as an option, but I say I want to see that chalkboard that tells me how these principles actually fit together. It's not enough for me to say, they all matter, and they all just kind of work out in a way that never leaves us with a bullet to bite.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even as you're explaining it to me, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, somebody says the order you put it in, I think, was rights matter. And I know this is not, you're just explaining this pluralism, so I'm not trying to ascribe something to you. It's just, you said something like rights matter and consequences matter. And in my internal monologue, the first thought that popped up was, well, then isn't it probably that rights are subordinate in that, like, wouldn't they have to be? I mean, you can only say rights matter if there is a consequence for not having the right. Otherwise, I'm not sure what you're talking about anymore, right? Like, do I have a right to something totally useless and neutral that nobody would ever fight about? That doesn't seem to make sense.
So I think so I think what somebody who is sympathetic to that view might say is, well, rights matter independently of their consequences. So what I'm about to sort of lay out is, I think, maybe the strongest version of the view.
Sure.
I think this is basically Mike Humer's view. So you say rights matter independently of the consequences, but if the consequences get significant enough, they can be outweighed. So for example, and I think there's compelling intuitions behind this view where I say, look, suppose it turns out that you got $50 in your wallet, and it turns out that I know somehow I can do more good for that world, for the world with that $50 than you can. Like, I don't know what you're going to spend it on, but I'm going to take it out of your wallet and give it to the Against Malaria Foundation. Intuitively, that still seems wrong. It still seems like I shouldn't take it from you. But then you go back to the really extraordinary case that we were talking about earlier, where me stealing a little bit from your wallet saves the world. And say, yeah, you gotta steal it. And so, like, there's a lot going for this view, which is rights sort of matter independently of the consequences, but the consequences get significant enough, the consequences overwhelm the rights. Like, I think this is actually how a lot of people think about morality.
Yeah.
I guess my issue there is there's still a worry that that there's got to be a cutoff, it seems. So it's, can I steal something from you to prevent somebody from getting like a bruised finger? Maybe not. Can I steal from you to prevent somebody from like breaking their leg? Maybe. Can I steal from you? And so, so the point is just there's got to be there has to be like a threshold where we say this is when the rights give way to the consequences. And I want a non-arbitrary way. Like, can I violate rights to save one person? Can I violate rights to save two people? Three? And you're like, no. You can't do it to save 97. But there's something magical about the number 98. And I'm like, I want to hear more about that before I sign on to that theory.
Yeah, so I love Mike. His intuitionism is really interesting to me, but I've had the same sort of see, Mike is a really rational guy, so of course he's not going to agree to kill all of humanity to avoid scraping someone's thumb,
right?
It's like, but again, you're right. There's some tension there where, okay, well, exactly how is this calculation being made? But so here's one possible answer, and I have sympathy with this answer. Just to lay that out, is that like a moral nihilist would say the reason you're not going to come up with that calculation is because it doesn't exist, and you're talking about something that is a bit of an error. And the only thing that'll happen is you're either going to be satisfied with what happens as a result of your decision, or you're not. And that's going to be true of everybody. And we all just proceed on that basis anyway, right? So, like, for example, you're going to steal $50 from my wallet to invest it into GameStop during COVID-19 when it was going up like crazy, right? And then you hand me back $4,000, let's say. And then I go, hey, wait a minute, you took that out of my wallet and you didn't ask me. And I go to a judge and I say, hey, judge, this guy gave me took 50 and gave me $4,000. Judge is not going to give you any damages. Let's leave aside the criminal situation, right? The judge is not going to give you any damages because he's going to be like, well, the outcome here, I can't really. Are you really harmed right now? Or are we all going to kind of accept this in society? And I just feel like that's what happens anyway, right?
I mean, so it could be the case that just like as a matter of fact about how people respond to these sorts of problems, we're like, like if nobody's complaining, maybe like who cares? But I do think, that so this kind of goes back to the earlier question, which is like, well, why are we even having this conversation about morality and justice? And so I think if we want to say, as I do, that like there are right and wrong ways to proceed about how to organize an economy, how to organize a government, these sorts of things. Then, so like you could go the nihilist route, but then everybody's in trouble. And maybe we are. Maybe we don't have a good objection to the nihilist. Yeah. But then consequentialist, pluralist, deontologist, we're all in the same boat. We're all going down. If the nihilist is correct, and again, like maybe the nihilist is. Like, I'm not quite convinced. But I think if we do go that route, then no particular theory has any advantage. So we could say something like, well, people tend to like X over Y. And so that's like, say, yeah, but people might like things that are bad or immoral. Like that seems to me also sort of a plausible thing to say.
Yeah. So, I mean, people would, and they'd be right. Like some people do, and well, all people a little bit and to varying degrees, like things that might be considered bad by someone else. Right. And I'm phrasing that in a very particular way. And I'm not trying to pin you into agreeing with nihilism here either. It just seems like on a practical level, it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'd all be, I mean, I know what you mean. All of the other moral theories would fail because if nihilism is true, it just logically follows that the other moral theories can't be true if nihilism is even a moral theory. But it doesn't necessarily mean we'd be in consequential trouble in the sense that we wouldn't get what we want as humans, right? I mean, we all are sort of wired statistically similarly. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here as a society. A few of us are wired very differently, and we, as a group, don't tend to like them very much, which seems to take care of itself eventually. So I don't know if, yeah, you're right. I'm backtracking onto the conversation, the question
Well,
previously, but yeah.
well, just to follow up. So I think so like you might still say that there are non-moral if there's no morality, there might still be non-moral reasons. So you say, I like pistachio ice cream. And I'm like, all right, well, that's a reason to eat pistachio ice cream. That's fine. But the worry about the nihilist route is to say, well, is the most we can say about murder is like most people don't like murder in the way that most people don't like, I don't know. I don't know what most people don't like.
Yeah.
New like metal. Raisinets. I don't know. Do people like Raisinets? I don't like Raisinets. I always thought that was a very subpar candy. But it's like, it seems to me we want to say something different about murder and Raisinets. Like, it's like, yeah, most people don't like it. Okay, like that's fine. But it's not just like most people don't like murder. We want to say, even if like lots of people suddenly started liking murder, it would still be wrong. And here again, I haven't like produced an argument for that, but that seems to me a very big cost of going. So you could say, yeah, like we can still talk about reasons to pursue things that we like and we don't like, but it also seems to me we want to be able to say something stronger. We don't want to put Raisinets and murder on the same level.
Now, you're not just saying this because you don't want, you're not just trying to rescue new metal here, right?
Well, so no, I do think there are objective standards according to which new metal is maybe the pinnacle of artistic achievement. I would, yes. I mean, I'm happy to argue for that conclusion. Okay, maybe new metal is the Raisinets actually of music. That's that's a good thought.
Do you like Raisinets?
No, I don't.
Oh man, okay. I would have gone the other way if someone had asked me.
No, I'm not. I don't like Raisinets. I always thought it's more like, why? I can't imagine ever being in a movie theater candy counter and thinking that is the single best item behind the glass. I just can't imagine a scenario. Like maybe if they were all out of everything. But when is that ever the best candy available at the movie theater? I don't get it.
Yeah, I'd rather just have a cup of that synthetic butter even than
yes, that would be preferable. I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to this whole morality discussion then. So it's not, I'm not sure where you stand on this, and maybe it's not fair for me to ask you, so just apologies if this is too forward, but like, is it fair to say then that you think there are objective morals and you're not just a person who will take the institutional position that you were describing earlier? You think there are objective morals all the way down, let's put it that way, and that utilitarianism generates the most correct answers to that possible.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Right. So, earlier we were talking about there's the institutional level of analysis, and then there's the level of analysis where we're, analyzing individual behavior and actions and so on. Yeah. So I would say consequentialism, and I would even go so far as to saying utilitarianism in particular is here again, the best bad, they're all bad theories. Or maybe I should say they're all unsatisfying theories, but I think utilitarianism is the best one, and largely for some of the reasons we've already been discussing, where it seems like when we're assessing individual action, like things that we think are right for people to do, things that we think are wrong, they right actions tend to produce good consequences, wrong actions. And then you could have these views which say no, it's like categorically wrong to lie, and then you run into these problems where it seems quite obvious that you should lie. And so I think something like utilitarianism gives us the best account of morality at the individual level as well.
It's interesting because like in a lot of fields, like economics is like this, physics, psychology, a bunch of other things, it's sort of understood that the theories you're working with are probably not completely correct. They're just the best we can do right now. And I find a lot more pushback in philosophy. It's like, oh no, I found this one instance under all these stipulations that will never happen in the real world where your theory isn't holding up, so it's all bunk. It's all got to go, right? Like I find that happens a lot more. And I actually find it refreshing to talk to somebody who's sort of saying, don't let me put words in your mouth, but like, okay, maybe utilitarianism is not perfect, but it does make the most sense based on what we can know.
Yeah. So I think, that there are these bullets that you have to bite for utilitarians. But like I said, I think that's true of any theory. And so I mean, my attitude towards a lot of these cases. So earlier you were saying, well, what if we do find ourselves in these circumstances where you can, redistribute the organs and nobody finds out? So yeah, like in those circumstances. But I would also say, like, be very cautious. If any surgeon is listening to this, please do not take it upon yourself to do that. Because we're not great at knowing when that is. But, for one reason or another, this is what I say, yeah, okay, do it. And that still seems counterintuitive. I'm more than willing to concede that. And would just say, well, that is counterintuitive. But sometimes counterintuitive things are true. And in fact, so like, I don't know, this is not the best analogy, but sometimes we're like, it is counterintuitive to me that a jalapeno is a fruit, but apparently it's a fruit. Because it has seeds. Is like I learned this in a podcast I was listening to with my kids many years ago. Jalapeno, and we don't really have much invested in whether we call a jalapeno a fruit, and so we're like, oh, that's weird, but okay, like I'm not going to fight back against the person who tells me. I'll say, okay, jalapeno's a fruit. And so when somebody says, it's like right in that really weird instance to redistribute the person's organs, we feel differently than we do in the jalapeno. We have a lot invested in it in a way that we don't in the jalapeno case. But my view is, like, we are open to counterintuitive conclusions in a lot of contexts. And we should be open to them in the case of morality as well, especially when we have plausible debunking stories. So actually, one paper that I wrote with a co-author, Adam Lerner, which I'm biased, but I think it's really interesting. So there's all this really sort of fascinating work on the link between disgust and morality. And so, long story short, disgust seems to sort of amplify negative moral judgments. And so, and we're also disgusted by what are called body envelope violations. Yeah. So like, you cut me open and blood comes, it's disgusting. Who wants it? And so you say, well, what you are imagining going on in this case is like a poor patient on the operating table getting carved open. Their guts are spilling out everywhere. This is terrible. This is wrong. You say, okay, well, but how is this different really from like certain variations of the trolley problem where you're killing one? And one plausible conjecture, I'll just call it a conjecture at this point, is like, disgust is activated when we're imagining a kidney redistribution. And we're not as disgusted at the trolley case. And so there it's like, I'm still willing to grant that it's counterintuitive to say that it's correct, it's morally right to redistribute the organs in that particular case. But I also kind of think, if we have a plausible explanation, we're like, maybe you shouldn't be quite as bothered by it, morally speaking, as you are. Then I think that sort of helps strengthen the case for the utilitarian argument.
Yeah, and it's interesting how I want to tell you about, we were talking about lying earlier and when it makes sense to lie. And I don't mean to besmirch this person I'm going to mention, but this is kind of funny. I was on Facebook and I saw this thing pop up where Peter Singer, the philosopher, was selling his jacket from the 1970s.
It was, the price was getting high too on that auction last time I saw it.
Yeah, and I had two thoughts. I thought, well, that's really cool. I'd love to have, and then I thought, is he lying? Like, I wouldn't, like, if somebody is gonna pick up a coat and give it and take this money and give it to a good cause and claim that this coat's from the 70s, it's this guy for sure.
You're right. You're thinking he went to Goodwill, picked it up for $20. Yeah.
Yeah, I said, oh,
that's
my
interesting.
Coat from the 70s.
Well,
I know. Here's why I don't mean to besmirch him.
It was a good-looking coat, though. It was a nice coat, I think. Yeah.
The thing is, with him, if he did get that money, if he did do that, he would still send the money to something good. I have confidence in that. Whereas somebody else would just be doing that to keep the money for themselves. But I think that it's utilitarianism on a personal level leaves such a can of worms open. But with stuff like that, like I know this is a funny example, right? But
No, so no, I think that's a good example. So one so, right, so all right, so you're telling me you're utilitarian, and I say, oh, okay, so this means like you'll lie to me when the results are good. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. And I'm like, well, now like, well, how can I trust you? Okay, like I don't know if this is your jacket or what. And it's like, oh yeah, that is a problem. So like one attempt at a resolution of this problem, which like I'm actually kind of sympathetic to, even though I don't actually put this into practice, for as evidenced by the fact that we're talking about utilitarianism, is
yeah,
you should never tell anyone to be a utilitarian. Like you should never.
right.
So the utilitarian position publicly is just like, oh, just be like a good, like Kantian, and like never tell a lie, blah blah blah. Like that, because that would be better, because then people will believe you, and like there are good consequences that come from people trusting your word and thinking, hey, look, I know if this person tells me they're going to pick me up at the airport, I know they will do, I know they will keep their word.
Right.
And they're not gonna, and like if they say, oh, I can't make it because like I had a family emergency, like you want to be able to believe or were they actually working overtime against malaria? Like you want to be able to trust them.
That's right.
But the only way for people to trust utilitarians is if utilitarians just keep their mouths shut about utilitarianism. I actually think that's like kind of more than kind of plausible. Actually, I think that's very plausible. Uh, so one thing, but obviously I don't put that into practice because I'm talking about it right now. But I think that's like a really interesting and kind of serious position, even though people don't like it for lots of reasons. So I mean, I guess one thing to maybe salvage my position of talking about it a little bit is that, well, one is like I'm just not that influential. So like I don't think anything I say is going to, and like now you can't trust what I'm about to say because of what I said previously, but it's like, yeah, I am not. So like, I do not make utilitarian calculations in my daily life. It is not as though when I tell someone that I'm going to pick them up from the airport, and I'm like, getting out the spreadsheet and figuring out, is this really the best? So it really, and so this is like sort of a middle ground that I think is pretty plausible, where it's like, look, for most activities day to day, just like be a decent person. Like common sense morality is very good 98% of the time. But then there are these there are these problems where you just need something more sophisticated than common sense morality. So like charitable giving, for example, I think no, you gotta break up the spreadsheet. I think like, should I donate to the opera or should I donate to
Right.
malaria relief? I think you gotta think in theoretical terms for that. Institutional questions
Should you give
too.
it to, what is it? He just gave his whole paycheck to orphans with diseases. I think that's a Simpsons. Homer's like, what's wrong with that guy? That guy
Yeah,
just
well,
gave his
no.
paycheck to.
So Peter Singer like has this. I mean, there's been a lot more work on this since then, but he had this really interesting article a long time ago, where he's like, yeah, like what, like he like criticizing certain people's charitable donations.
Yeah.
On the grounds that they were like really inefficient. I think he's talking about an art museum where like somebody gave like 50 million to an art museum. He's like, this is terrible. Like, do you know how many kids you could help? And I agree with him there. I actually agree with him.
Yeah,
But
I do too.
but people for some reason don't like that. I mean, I get why they don't like it. I think the thought is like, look, if you're donating, you're going above and beyond. And so, even if you would save more lives doing something else, it seems sort of distasteful to criticize any charitable donation. And, I don't buy that judgment, although I can get myself in the headspace of people who do. But yes, so, right. So I think like when you're living your life day to day, just be a good person according to common sense morality. But then there are these cases where you got to step back. Like, what sort of institutions do we want? How should you allocate your budget, like your money, that sort of stuff? Then I think you gotta circle back to the theory.
Okay, we're getting on an hour here. Well, I was hoping I could, and again, I'm just dropping this on you, so my apologies, but I think it'll be fun enough anyway. picture a libertarian who became a libertarian just because they like certain, they want to be able to carry their gun to whatever, wherever, Bucky's, to pick up an explosive that will blow up a piece of the earth that gives them some satisfaction
on their private property.
On their private property.
Okay.
And ain't nobody going to stop them. Why should they be a utilitarian? Should they be utilitarian? Like, how does that get them to where they want to be as a libertarian?
I don't know if it gets them to where they want to be. To that person, Bucky's is a gas station?
I think it's like look, I'm Canadian, so if I'm struggling with this, it's because there's not really very many people around here.
I see.
And there's no Bucky's, but I think it's like a big convenience store gas station. Yeah.
Okay. In West Virginia, we have Sheetz. Have you ever seen a Sheetz? It's very good. I like Sheetz a lot. Yeah. But okay, back to the question. I mean, so this I think is probably not going to be a very satisfying answer. It's probably going to be anticlimactic. I'd say, well, look, I might not give you what you want, but if there are compelling reasons to think that it's true, that's why you should believe it. And I think there are compelling reasons to think that utilitarianism is true. I mean, I would, this is a kind of trivial analogy, but I don't know. Suppose you and I go out to dinner. And we agree to split the check in a certain way, and we each do the math, and we come up with different answers. And it turns out your answer is correct, mine is wrong, but I don't love that because it actually turns out I have to pay more if you're correct. I'm like, I don't like that. You might go like, yeah, no, I know you don't like it, but like this is the correct answer, so pay up. And so I would say, yeah, like maybe this doesn't quite get you where you want to go, but if it's true, you should believe it. But the other thing too, though, I guess I'll say, and maybe this is more in the spirit of your question, like, even though like that's not how I would spend my time, like I do think there's something like about this idea that like as long as you are doing something, like this is a little bit weird because like if he's blowing stuff up, then he's imposing risks on people. So.
He's in the middle of a field with nobody around. It's just
so,
he's not a bad guy. He just wants to do those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, look, I as an individual might say like, if that's, if you're not harming anyone and this is how you want to spend your leisure time, that's okay. Like certainly I don't think a utilitarian minded government, which I think, like I said, will have this sort of broadly libertarian form, is going to mess with you. Like really, we're like so this goes like back to the I think sort of maybe like a deeper point about the harmony between utilitarianism and libertarianism. So there's this idea that look, I don't like if you said to me like plan out my day so as I can to make me as happy as I can be. I was like how would I even know where to start? I know nothing. Like I don't know. Maybe we could listen to that. Maybe I could get some music for you that we like. I don't know. Maybe we could talk about that. But like, you know what makes you happy. I know what makes me happy. I'm not infallible. But like generally speaking, compared to other people, I know what makes me happy, more clearly than you do, and vice versa. This is something like John Stuart Mill talks a lot about this. So I know more about my own interests, and I also have stronger incentives to act in my own interest than you do, because I actually suffer the negative consequences if I get it wrong. And so I would say, look, the person who is not hurting others, and to borrow the phrase from Mill, is pursuing their own good in their own way, even if it is not my good, I would pursue a different good in a different way. I would say, look, like there's some reason to think that this guy is doing something that makes him happy. He's not hurting anybody else. And so like in some sense, like the utilitarian doesn't really have reason to interfere with them. Now, like it's going to be more complicated because I'm going to say, well, like maybe you could have spent that money on malaria relief. That's another thing. But generally speaking, like if again we're talking about the institutional level, like when the United States taxes me, virtually none, maybe none goes to like the most effective causes in the world.
Right.
And there are reasons for that. It's not just like a coincidence that doesn't happen. And so I'm gonna say, like, look, generally speaking, like pursue your own good in your own way, as long as you leave other people alone, be a decent person. But yeah, like when you get a paycheck, consider giving, a decent portion to the Against Malaria Foundation or some other kind of effective charity. So like, I'm not going to bother you too much. I'll bother you about charitable donations, but other than that, I will let you, pursue peaceful recreation as you see fit.
And I guess it would have to make economic sense too, right? The amount of bothering that happens, because then if you bother more than you're going to get back, what's the point? Yeah.
Well, right. So it depends. Like, are people able to hear the? Like, we can make this case very complicated. They could strike a bargain with one another though to reach. It's like we could always make that happen. But yeah, like, assuming no negative externalities in this case, it's like, yeah, like this kind of goes back to the point, like, from a utilitarian perspective itself, I think it would be a disaster for the state or like any kind of body of people to try to micromanage the lives of others. It's really just like, do your own thing, like stay out of other people's way, and like, try to help in an effective way when you can do that. Like that, I think, is really like the bottom line message. Like, if we were perfect people, perfectly compliant with utilitarianism, then we would be giving away 90% of our income to the most effective charities and so on and so forth. And maybe there is a sense in which we should do that. But also that message is a non-starter for almost everyone. So if you were like, what actual advice would I give to that person? I would say it's fine if you want to do that on your day off, but just give like 10% to the Against Malaria Foundation. Then I'll stop bothering you.
All right. I think I'm gonna, that was good. I'm gonna leave it on that. And I do want to ask you though, is there anything you wanted to send people to read that you've done or you're working on, or
Well, so I actually did write a piece for a Cato volume a few years back on utilitarianism and libertarianism, where I go into more depth on some of this stuff. I think it's just called Utilitarianism, and you can find it online. So I would say, yeah,
I'll link it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. So if somebody's interested in hearing some more of the details, that might be a place to go.
Okay. And I'll plug this too because I really liked it. You had the book Why It's Okay to Ignore Politics, right? That was the title.
Yes, thank you for the plug.
I thought it was fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, on that note then, on that happy note, thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again.
Beautiful. Thank you.